Welcome to Midnight and Murder Crime Stories. Perfect for late hours, heavy eyelids in the space between wake and sleep. Dim the lights, let the quiet take hold, and let the stories carry you. Let's go. Case 1, the locked room murder. Detective Sarah Chen had seen plenty of impossible crimes in her 15 years on the force, but none quite like this. The victim, renowned physicist Dr. Marcus Whitfield, was found dead in his home study, a room locked from the inside, with no other means of entry or exit. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Dr. Whitfield's housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, had discovered the body when she arrived for her evening shift. She'd been working for the professor for over a decade, always arriving at 11:30 p.m. to tidy up after his late-night research sessions. "I knocked on the study door as usual," Mrs. Hartwell explained, her hands trembling as she spoke. "When he didn't answer, I tried the handle, but it was locked. I have keys to every room in the house, so I unlocked it and there he was." Detective Chen examined the scene carefully. Dr. Whitfield sat slumped over his mahogany desk, a single bullet wound to the back of his head. The gun, a .38 revolver, lay on the floor beside his chair. At first glance, it appeared to be suicide, but several details troubled Chen. The study was on the second floor of the Victorian mansion, with only one door and two windows. The door had been locked from the inside with a deadbolt, and the key was still in the lock. The windows were sealed shut, painted over years ago and never opened. Chen had her team check for hidden passages or secret doors, but the walls were solid brick, and the floor showed no signs of disturbance. "Tell me about Dr. Whitfield's recent behavior," Chen asked Mrs. Hartwell as they sat in the drawing room. "He'd been agitated lately, working on some big project. Lots of visitors coming and going at odd hours. Scientists, businessmen, even some government types." Mrs. Hartwell wrung her hands. "He seemed worried about something, but he never confided in me about his work." Chen's partner, Detective Mike Rodriguez, approached with a puzzled expression. "We've got a problem, Sarah. The gun, it's not registered to Whitfield. And here's the weird part. There's no gunpowder residue on his hands." This deepened the mystery. If Whitfield had shot himself, there should be residue. If someone else had pulled the trigger, how did they escape from a locked room? Chen decided to investigate Dr. Whitfield's recent projects. His research assistant, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, met them at the university physics department the next morning. Marcus was working on quantum entanglement applications, Dr. Walsh explained as she led them through the lab. Specifically, he was exploring theoretical possibilities for instantaneous matter transmission. It was groundbreaking work, but also controversial. "Controversial how?" Rodriguez asked. "Well, the military applications were obvious. Imagine being able to teleport weapons or personnel instantly across any distance. Marcus was getting pressure from the Department of Defense to weaponize his research, but he was having second thoughts." Chen made notes. Who else knew about this research? His research team, of course, and Dr. Richard Kellerman from the rival lab at MIT. There was also Thomas Brennan, a DoD contractor who'd been pushing hard for the results. The pieces were starting to form a picture. Chen requested phone records and discovered that Dr. Whitfield had received several threatening calls in the past week. One number traced back to Brennan's office. When they brought Brennan in for questioning, he was defensive but cooperative. Look, Whitfield was wasting taxpayer money on philosophical hand-wringing. The applications for this technology could revolutionize warfare, save American lives. "Were you at his house last night?" Chen asked. "No, I was at a conference in Washington. I have 200 witnesses." Brennan's alibi checked out, leaving Chen back at square one. She returned to the crime scene, studying every detail of the locked room. Something nagged at her, a small detail she'd missed. On her third examination of the study, Chen noticed something odd about the grandfather clock in the corner. It was an antique piece, nearly 7 feet tall, with an intricate mechanical movement. When she looked closer, she saw that one of the clock's decorative elements, a small brass finial, was missing. "Rodriguez, help me move this clock," she called. Behind the clock, they found a small hole in the wall, barely large enough for a pencil. Chen's flashlight revealed that it led to the adjacent room, Dr. Whitfield's bedroom. This is it, Chen said. But how did the killer get a gun through a hole this small? The answer came from the ballistics report. The bullet had an unusual composition. It wasn't lead, but a special ceramic material that would disintegrate after impact. Chen realized they weren't dealing with a conventional gun at all. Her breakthrough came when she consulted with Dr. Walsh about the physics department's equipment. Is there any way to propel a small projectile through a tiny opening with enough force to be lethal? Dr. Walsh thought for a moment. Well, theoretically, you could use electromagnetic acceleration. We have a railgun prototype in the lab for testing projectile physics. It's about the size of a briefcase. Chen felt the pieces clicking together. The killer had used a miniaturized railgun to fire a ceramic bullet through the hole behind the clock. The projectile would have enough velocity to be lethal, but would disintegrate on impact, leaving only conventional bullet-like trauma. But who had access to such technology? Chen's investigation led her to Dr. Kellerman at MIT. His rivalry with Whitfield was well documented, and his lab specialized in electromagnetic weapons research. When they arrived at MIT, they found Kellerman packing his office. Taking a sabbatical, he explained nervously. Sudden opportunity abroad. Dr. Kellerman, where were you last Tuesday night at 11:30 p.m.? I was here, working late. I often stay until midnight. Can anyone verify that? Well, no. I work alone at night. Chen noticed a briefcase by his desk that looked remarkably like the railgun prototype Dr. Walsh had described. When she asked to examine it, Kellerman became agitated. That's proprietary research. You can't just... We have a warrant, Chen interrupted, producing the document. Inside the briefcase was indeed a miniaturized railgun, recently fired. Forensics would later match ceramic residue from the device to fragments found in Dr. Whitfield's brain tissue. Kellerman's motive was both professional and personal. He'd been working on similar quantum entanglement research, but Whitfield's team was months ahead. The DoD contract would go to whoever published first, and Kellerman was facing bankruptcy after years of unsuccessful experiments. I never meant for it to happen this way, Kellerman confessed during interrogation. I just wanted to scare him, make him back down. But when I saw him working late that night, I knew he was close to a breakthrough. I couldn't let him beat me again. The locked room murder was solved, but the technology that made it possible raised disturbing questions about the future of crime. Chen filed her report with a recommendation that electromagnetic weapons research be more closely monitored. As she left the courthouse after Kellerman's sentencing, Chen reflected on how the case had challenged her assumptions about impossible crimes. In a world of advancing technology, she realized, the definition of impossible was constantly evolving. Dr. Whitfield's research notes were eventually classified by the government, his quantum entanglement theories deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. But Chen wondered if they'd simply delayed the inevitable, a future where criminals could kill from impossible distances, through impossible barriers, in impossible ways. The locked room murder of Dr. Marcus Whitfield became a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles, a reminder that as science advanced, so too must the methods of those who sought to solve the crimes it might enable. Case 2, the vanishing heiress. The Pemberton estate had been the crown jewel of the city's elite social scene for over a century. Its sprawling gardens, marble fountains, and grand ballroom had hosted presidents, movie stars, and titans of industry. So when Victoria Pemberton, the 28-year-old heiress to the family fortune, disappeared from her own engagement party, it sent shockwaves through high society. Detective James Morrison had worked plenty of missing person cases, but this one felt different from the moment he stepped through the mansion's ornate front doors. The party had been in full swing when Victoria vanished. 200 guests, catered staff, security personnel, and family members all present. Yet somehow she had simply disappeared without a trace. She was right here talking to the mayor's wife, explained Victoria's fiancé, Charles Blackwood, a successful investment banker. His hand shook as he pointed to a spot near the main staircase. I went to get a champagne, and when I came back 5 minutes later, she was gone. Morrison surveyed the scene. The ballroom was a mess of abandoned champagne flutes and scattered rose petals. Crime scene technicians were already dusting for fingerprints, while uniformed officers questioned guests who remained. When did you last see her? Morrison asked Charles. Around 10:30 p.m. The party started at 8 and everything was perfect. Victoria was happy, excited about the announcement. Charles's voice cracked. She'd been planning this night for months. Morrison's partner, Detective Lisa Park, approached with her notepad. I've got statements from about 50 guests so far. The timeline seems solid. Victoria was definitely here until 10:30. Then nobody saw her after that. What about the security cameras? That's the weird part. The system malfunctioned around 10:25 p.m., just went dark for about 20 minutes, then came back online. Morrison frowned. Technical malfunctions were rare but not impossible. Still, the timing was suspicious. Any signs of tampering? The security company is checking, but the head of security, Frank Russo, says everything looked normal when he checked the system earlier that evening. The investigation began with the obvious suspects. In Morrison's experience, when wealthy people disappeared, money was usually involved. Victoria's father, Edmund Pemberton, had died 6 months earlier, leaving his vast fortune to his only daughter. The will was complex, with various family members receiving smaller bequests, but Victoria was the primary beneficiary. She inherited everything, explained the family lawyer, Harold Wickham, when Morrison met with him the next morning. The estate is worth approximately $40 million. Real estate, investments, the family business, all of it goes to Victoria. What happens if she's declared dead? The will has a contingency clause. If Victoria dies without issue, the estate would be divided among her closest relatives. Her uncle Robert would receive the largest share, followed by her cousin Margaret and her stepmother, Helen. Morrison made notes. Financial motives were clear, but each potential beneficiary had seemed genuinely concerned about Victoria's disappearance. Still, he'd learned not to trust appearances, especially when millions were at stake. The first break came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, one of the catering staff, approached Detective Park nervously. I saw something that night, Maria said in heavily accented English. The señorita, she was arguing with someone in the garden, a man in a dark suit. What time was this? Maybe 10:15, 10:20. I was taking glasses to the kitchen when I heard voices. They were, how do you say, angry voices. Park showed Maria photographs of the male guests. After studying them carefully, Maria pointed to one, Dr. Jonathan Pierce, Victoria's psychiatrist. This was an interesting development. Morrison had interviewed Dr. Pierce briefly the night of the disappearance, but the doctor had claimed he barely knew Victoria beyond their professional relationship. He'd attended the party as a family friend, invited by Victoria's stepmother, Helen. When Morrison and Park visited Dr. Pierce at his office the next day, they found him packing files into boxes. Going somewhere, doctor? Morrison asked. Just reorganizing. What can I do for you? We have a witness who saw you arguing with Victoria Pemberton in the garden the night she disappeared. Dr. Pierce's composure cracked slightly. We had a brief conversation, yes. Nothing I'd characterize as an argument. What did you discuss? I can't reveal details of our therapeutic relationship. Doctor-patient privilege. Morrison leaned forward. Doctor, Victoria is missing. If you know something that could help us find her, you have an obligation to speak up. After a long pause, Dr. Pierce sat down heavily. Victoria had been having difficulties, depression, anxiety. She'd been seeing me for about 6 months, since her father's death. Was she suicidal? No, quite the opposite. She was making good progress, but she'd discovered something about her family that troubled her deeply. What kind of something? She believed someone close to her was stealing from the family business. She'd been investigating financial irregularities and was planning to confront this person after the engagement party. This revelation changed everything. Morrison obtained a warrant for the Pemberton family's financial records and discovered that Victoria had been right. Someone had been systematically embezzling from the family business for years, taking nearly $2 million. The trail led to Robert Pemberton, Victoria's uncle and the company's CFO. He had gambling debts and a cocaine addiction that had spiraled out of control after his brother's death. Victoria had uncovered his scheme just days before the party. When Morrison and Park arrested Robert at his downtown office, he broke down immediately. "I never meant for it to go this far," he sobbed. "I just needed time to pay back the money. Victoria said she was going to expose me, ruin me. I panicked." "What happened that night, Robert?" "I asked her to meet me in the garden. I begged her to give me time to make things right. She said it was too late, that she'd already prepared evidence for the police." Robert's voice became hollow. "I didn't plan what happened next. I couldn't let her destroy my life." "Where is she, Robert?" "The old wine cellar, beneath the east wing of the house. I didn't mean to hurt her. She fell and hit her head when we were struggling. I thought she was just unconscious, but—" Morrison felt sick. Victoria hadn't vanished mysteriously. She'd been murdered by her own uncle and hidden in the family's wine cellar. Robert had used his knowledge of the estate's layout to conceal the body, then disabled the security system to cover his tracks. The discovery of Victoria's body confirmed Robert's confession. She'd died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with falling against the stone garden wall. Robert had panicked, carried her body to the wine cellar, and then returned to the party to maintain his alibi. The saddest part, Detective Park observed as they filed their final report, is that Victoria was trying to give him a chance to make things right. She'd scheduled a meeting with him for the day after the party, planning to offer him a way to pay back the money quietly. Robert Pemberton was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder and embezzlement. The family fortune was eventually distributed according to the will's contingency clause, but the scandal destroyed the Pemberton name in high society. Charles Blackwood, Victoria's fiancé, established a foundation in her memory to help families dealing with addiction and financial crisis. "Victoria always believed in second chances," he said at the foundation's launch. "Maybe if we'd all been better at recognizing when someone was struggling, this tragedy could have been prevented." Morrison had worked hundreds of cases, but Victoria Pemberton's murder stayed with him. It was a reminder that wealth and privilege couldn't protect against the most basic human emotions: fear, desperation, and the terrible choices people made when they felt cornered. The Grand Pemberton estate was eventually sold to a hotel chain, its ballroom converted to a conference center. But locals still whispered about the night the heiress vanished and the dark family secrets that had been buried beneath marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Case 3. The Poison Pen. Professor Margaret Steinberg had built her reputation on precision. In her 30-year career at the university, she'd published groundbreaking research on Renaissance literature, mentored dozens of graduate students, and earned the respect of colleagues worldwide. So when she was found dead in her office, surrounded by the manuscripts she'd devoted her life to studying, it seemed like a peaceful end to a scholarly existence. Until the autopsy revealed she'd been poisoned. Detective Rachel Torres had always been drawn to complex cases, and this one promised to be particularly challenging. The victim was well-liked, with no obvious enemies. The method was sophisticated. Ricin, a naturally occurring poison that was difficult to detect and even harder to trace. Time of death was approximately 2:30 a.m., the medical examiner explained, as Torres studied the crime scene. The ricin was administered orally, probably in food or drink. It's a slow-acting poison, so she could have ingested it hours earlier. Torres examined Professor Steinberg's office. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Her desk was covered with manuscripts, notes, and correspondence. A half-empty cup of tea sat beside her computer, and a small plate held the remains of what appeared to be homemade cookies. "Any idea where the poison came from?" Torres asked. "Ricin is extracted from castor beans. It's not easy to make, but the process is well documented online. Someone with basic chemistry knowledge could produce it." The investigation began with Professor Steinberg's daily routine. According to her department secretary, she'd stayed late the previous evening to finish grading papers. She often worked until midnight or later, especially during busy academic periods. "She was a creature of habit," explained Dr. Patricia Wells, the department chair. "Same schedule every day, same lunch routine, same evening tea. Margaret was predictable." Torres made notes. Predictable routines made it easier for a killer to plan. "Did she have any enemies? Academic rivals? Disgruntled students?" "Margaret was tough, but fair. She had high standards, but students respected her. As for rivals, Dr. Wells hesitated. There was some tension with Dr. Harrison Blake from the history department. They'd been feuding over a research paper for months. The feud centered on a recently discovered manuscript attributed to Christopher Marlowe. Professor Steinberg had been the first to examine it, but Dr. Blake claimed the discovery was rightfully his. The manuscript, if authentic, would be worth millions and would secure the finder's academic legacy. Torres found Dr. Blake in his office, surrounded by stacks of historical documents. He was a small, nervous man in his 50s, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Professor Steinberg's death is a tragedy, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. She was a brilliant scholar, even if we disagreed on certain matters. Tell me about this manuscript dispute. Blake's face flushed. Margaret was trying to steal credit for my discovery. I found that manuscript in the British Library archives, but she used her connections to get first access. She was planning to publish without acknowledging my contribution. That seems like a strong motive for murder, Dr. Blake. I would never, academic disputes are settled through proper channels, not violence. I was planning to file a formal complaint with the university. Torres wasn't convinced. Blake had both motive and opportunity. He knew Professor Steinberg's routines and had access to her office. But ricin poisoning required careful planning, and Blake seemed too nervous to pull off such a sophisticated crime. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Torres interviewed Professor Steinberg's graduate students. One of them, Lisa Chen, revealed that their advisor had been receiving threatening letters for weeks. She didn't want to worry anyone, Lisa explained, but she showed me some of the letters. They were really disturbing: personal attacks, threats about her research, accusations of plagiarism. Did she report them to campus security? No, Margaret thought they were just from a crank. She said academics get criticism all the time, that it came with the territory. Torres obtained the letters from Professor Steinberg's office. They were typed on generic paper, with no distinguishing marks. The tone was increasingly hostile, accusing her of stealing ideas and threatening to expose her lies to the world. Handwriting analysis was impossible with typed letters, but Torres noticed something interesting. The letters referenced specific details about Professor Steinberg's research that weren't public knowledge. The writer had inside information about her work. This led Torres to focus on the university community. She interviewed colleagues, students, and staff members, looking for anyone with both access to Professor Steinberg's research and knowledge of chemistry. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Janet Morrison, the department's graduate secretary, mentioned that someone had been asking questions about Professor Steinberg's schedule. It was about 3 weeks ago, Janet recalled. A woman called, said she was a researcher from Oxford wanting to arrange a meeting with Margaret. She asked very specific questions about when Margaret worked late, her office hours, her daily routine. Did she leave a name? Dr. Sarah Hammond. But when I tried to follow up, Oxford said they'd never heard of her. Torres realized they were dealing with a sophisticated killer who had been planning the murder for weeks. The fake identity, the detailed surveillance, the choice of poison, all indicated careful premeditation. The case broke when Torres discovered that the threatening letters contained a linguistic quirk. The writer consistently used British spellings and phrasing, realize instead of realize, whilst instead of while. This was either someone from Britain or someone trying to disguise their identity by adopting British conventions. Further investigation revealed that Professor Steinberg had recently discovered plagiarism in a manuscript submitted to a prestigious journal. The paper was supposedly written by Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery, a British academic whose work on Renaissance drama had earned international recognition. But Professor Steinberg had realized that large portions of Montgomery's paper were lifted from unpublished research by a former graduate student, David Hartwell, who had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Steinberg had been preparing to expose the plagiarism when she was killed. Torres traveled to London to interview Dr. Montgomery. She found her in her office at King's College, a distinguished woman in her 60s with silver hair and an imperious manner. "I'm devastated to hear about Margaret's death," Montgomery said. "She was a colleague I greatly respected." "Dr. Montgomery, did you know that Professor Steinberg was investigating plagiarism in your recent paper?" The change in Montgomery's demeanor was immediate. Her face went pale and her hands began to shake. I don't know what you're talking about. She discovered that you stole David Hartwell's research. She was planning to expose you. Montgomery's composure cracked completely. David was my student. His work was done under my supervision. I had every right to use it. Not according to academic ethics, and not according to the law. Torres presented evidence that Montgomery had been in the United States during the time of the murder. Immigration records showed her entering the country under a false passport, and hotel records placed her in the university city on the night Professor Steinberg died. I built my career on that research, Montgomery confessed. When Margaret threatened to expose me, I panicked. I couldn't let her destroy everything I'd worked for. Montgomery had obtained ricin through her connections in the chemistry department at King's College. She'd traveled to the United States using forged documents, studied Professor Steinberg's routine, and poisoned her tea during a late-night visit to her office. I told her I was there to discuss a collaboration, Montgomery explained during her confession. She was always eager to work with international colleagues. I brought her cookies and tea, said it was a British tradition. She never suspected anything. The murder had been motivated by professional jealousy and fear of exposure. Montgomery had spent years building her reputation on stolen work, and she was willing to kill to protect her secret. Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery was extradited to the United States and sentenced to life in prison. David Hartwell's family finally received recognition for his contributions to Renaissance scholarship, and his research was published posthumously with full credit. Professor Margaret Steinberg was remembered not just as a brilliant scholar, but as someone who had died defending academic integrity. The university established an ethics committee in her name, dedicated to preventing plagiarism and protecting the rights of graduate students. Torres reflected on the case as she filed her final report. In a world where academic careers were built on reputation and recognition, the temptation to steal ideas could be overwhelming. But Professor Steinberg had proven that some principles were worth defending, even at the cost of one's life. The poison pen case became a cautionary tale in academic circles, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge must never come at the expense of truth and integrity. Professor Steinberg's legacy lived on in the ethical standards she had died to uphold. Case 4. The family business. The Torino family had controlled the city's waste management industry for 3 generations, building an empire that stretched from legitimate recycling operations to less savory enterprises. So when Vincent Torino, the 45-year-old heir to the family business, was found shot dead in his luxury penthouse, Detective Anthony Ricci knew he was walking into a labyrinth of family secrets, business rivalries, and criminal connections. The crime scene was a study in contrasts: opulent furniture stained with blood, expensive artwork overlooking a corpse, crystal glasses shattered across marble floors. Vincent had been shot 3 times in the chest with a .45 caliber pistol, execution style, while eating dinner alone in his dining room. No signs of forced entry, reported Detective Susan Martinez, Ricci's partner. The security system was disabled from the inside, and the doorman says only family members and close associates have access codes. Ricci studied the body. Vincent Torino had been a man of expensive tastes. His silk suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But he'd also been a man with enemies, both inside and outside the family business. Any witnesses, Ricci asked? The penthouse is soundproofed, and the building is mostly empty, just a few other units, all owned by wealthy out-of-town investors. Nobody heard the shots. The investigation began with family members, all of whom had alibis that seemed too convenient. Vincent's younger brother Michael claimed he was at his restaurant across town with dozens of witnesses. His sister Angela was supposedly at her daughter's school play, surrounded by other parents. Their uncle Sal, the family patriarch, was playing poker with his usual crew at the social club. It's like they all knew this was coming, Martinez observed as they left the family compound. Everyone has a perfect alibi for the exact time of the murder. Ricci had grown up in the same neighborhood as the Torinos, though on the other side of the law. He understood the family dynamics, the codes of loyalty and vengeance that governed their world. Vincent's murder wasn't random. It was personal, planned, and probably connected to the family business. The first crack in the case came from an unexpected source. Tommy the Fish Marcelli, a low-level associate who'd been arrested on an unrelated charge, offered information in exchange for a reduced sentence. Vincent was planning to go legit, Tommy explained during an interview at the county jail. He wanted to sell off the illegal operations and focus on the legitimate waste management business. But the family wasn't happy about it. Why not? The dirty money was where the real profits were. Garbage collection is steady income. But the other stuff, loan sharking, illegal dumping, protection rackets, that's where they made their fortune. Ricci made notes. Family businesses often struggled with generational changes, but in criminal enterprises, such conflicts could be deadly. Who opposed Vincent's plans? His brother Michael was furious. He'd been running the street operations for years, and Vincent wanted to shut him down. They had a huge fight about it last week. This information cast Michael Torino in a new light. His restaurant was legitimate, but Ricci knew it was also a front for money laundering and illegal gambling. If Vincent had threatened to expose or shut down these operations, Michael would have had strong motives for murder. When Ricci and Martinez re-interviewed Michael, they found him defensive and nervous. His restaurant was busy, but there was an undercurrent of tension among the staff. Vincent was my brother, Michael insisted. I would never hurt him, no matter what our business disagreements. Tell us about these disagreements. He had idealistic notions about going straight. He didn't understand that our family built this business on certain traditions. You can't just abandon that overnight. Were you angry about his plans? Michael's face hardened. I was frustrated, but that doesn't make me a killer. The investigation revealed that the Torino family was under pressure from multiple sources. The FBI had been building a RICO case against them for years, and Vincent's cooperation with authorities might have been his ticket to avoiding prison. His siblings, however, would have seen such cooperation as betrayal. Martinez discovered that Vincent had been meeting secretly with federal prosecutors. Phone records showed numerous calls to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a reliable source confirmed that Vincent was prepared to testify against other family members in exchange for immunity. He was going to rat out his own family, Martinez observed. That's a death sentence in their world. But the case took an unexpected turn when Ricci investigated the security system at Vincent's penthouse. The system had been disabled using Vincent's own access code, but the timing was suspicious. The system showed it was deactivated at 7:45 p.m., but the medical examiner placed the time of death at approximately 8:30 p.m. This suggested that Vincent had let his killer into the apartment voluntarily, or that the killer had been someone he trusted completely. Family members all had access codes, but so did Vincent's girlfriend, Maria Santos, and his business partner, Frank DeLuca. Maria Santos was a 28-year-old actress who'd been dating Vincent for 6 months. She was beautiful, intelligent, and seemingly devoted to him. But when Ricci dug deeper, he discovered that Maria had significant gambling debts and was being pressured by dangerous people. Vincent was going to help me with my debts, she explained when questioned. He said he'd take care of everything after he sorted out his family business. Did you know about his plans to cooperate with the FBI? He mentioned something about making a fresh start, but I didn't know the details. Vincent was very protective of me. He didn't want me involved in family business. Maria's alibi was solid. She'd been at an acting class across town with multiple witnesses. But Ricci noticed something odd about her story. She claimed Vincent had canceled their dinner plans that night, but the crime scene suggested he'd been expecting company. The breakthrough came when Ricci discovered that Frank DeLuca, Vincent's business partner, had been embezzling money from their legitimate operations. Vincent had discovered the theft and was planning to expose DeLuca as part of his cooperation deal with the FBI. DeLuca was a 52-year-old accountant who'd handled the family's finances for over a decade. He was quiet, methodical, and had always seemed loyal to the Torinos. But financial pressure had driven him to steal nearly $500,000 over 2 years. I needed the money for my daughter's medical treatment, DeLuca confessed when confronted with evidence. She has leukemia, and the experimental treatments weren't covered by insurance. I was going to pay it back. But Vincent found out. He discovered discrepancies in the books. I begged him to give me time to replace the money, but he said it was too late. He was going to include my theft in his testimony to the FBI. DeLuca had panicked. He'd known Vincent's routines, had access to his apartment, and understood that exposure would mean prison and the end of his daughter's treatment. He'd gone to Vincent's penthouse that night, intending to plead for more time, but the conversation had escalated. "I brought my gun just to scare him," DeLuca explained, "but Vincent said he couldn't protect me anymore, that the FBI deal was already done. I lost control." The murder had been unplanned, the result of desperation and fear. DeLuca had shot Vincent in a moment of panic, then tried to stage the scene to look like a professional hit. But his amateur attempts at misdirection had actually made the crime easier to solve. Frank DeLuca was sentenced to life in prison for murder in the first degree. The Torino family business eventually collapsed under federal investigation, with most members either imprisoned or fled to avoid prosecution. Vincent Torino's death had ironically accomplished what he'd hoped to achieve in life. It ended the family's criminal enterprise. But the cost was tremendous. A son and brother dead, a family destroyed, and a loyal employee driven to murder by desperation. Ricci reflected on the case as he closed the file. The Torino family had been undone not by their enemies, but by their own secrets and the pressure of trying to change too much too fast. Vincent's noble intentions had collided with the harsh realities of criminal life, and the result was tragic for everyone involved. The penthouse where Vincent died was eventually sold to a tech entrepreneur who had no knowledge of its bloody history. But in the old neighborhood where the Torinos had once ruled, people still talked about the night the family business died with its would-be reformer. Case 5. The Perfect Crime. Dr. Elizabeth Hart had always believed that the perfect crime was theoretically possible, a murder so carefully planned and executed that it would never be solved. As a forensic psychologist, she'd studied hundreds of criminal cases, analyzing the mistakes that led to capture and conviction. She'd even written a book about it, The Criminal Mind: Why Perfect Crimes Don't Exist. The irony wasn't lost on Detective Karen Walsh when she found Dr. Hart's body in her home office. A single bullet wound to the head and no obvious clues about who had killed her. It seemed that someone had taken Dr. Hart's theories and used them to commit the very crime she'd claimed was impossible. Walsh had been investigating homicides for 12 years, and she'd never encountered a scene this clean. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence, no witnesses, no obvious motive. The killer had been careful, methodical, and apparently invisible. Time of death was approximately 3:00 a.m., the medical examiner reported. Single gunshot wound to the head, close range. The bullet was a .22 caliber, but we haven't found the weapon. Walsh examined the scene carefully. Dr. Hart's office was exactly as she'd left it. Books arranged perfectly on shelves, papers neatly organized on her desk, no signs of struggle or disturbance. The only thing out of place was the victim herself. "Any signs of forced entry?" Walsh asked the crime scene technician. "None. The killer either had a key or was let in by Dr. Hart herself." This suggested that the victim knew her killer, or at least trusted them enough to allow entry in the middle of the night. Walsh began building a list of people who had access to Dr. Hart's home and might have reason to visit at such an unusual hour. Dr. Hart's personal life was as organized as her professional one. She was divorced, with no children, and maintained a small circle of close friends. Her ex-husband, Dr. Richard Hart, was a surgeon who lived across town. Their divorce had been amicable, according to mutual friends, with no apparent lingering resentments. Elizabeth was a brilliant woman, Dr. Hart told Walsh when she interviewed him at the hospital where he worked. "Our marriage didn't work out, but I respected her professionally. She was making important contributions to forensic psychology." "When did you last see her?" "About 2 weeks ago. We had lunch to discuss our daughter's college expenses. Yes, I said we had no children. I meant together. Elizabeth was helping to put my daughter from a previous marriage through school." Walsh made notes. Financial arrangements between ex-spouses could be sources of conflict, but Dr. Hart seemed genuinely grieved by his ex-wife's death. The investigation revealed that Dr. Hart had been working on a new book about unsolved murders. Her research had taken her deep into cold cases, and she'd been corresponding with law enforcement agencies across the country. Perhaps she'd gotten too close to someone who preferred their crimes to remain unsolved. Walsh found Dr. Hart's research notes in her office computer. The files were extensive, covering dozens of cases dating back decades. One file was particularly large, the case of the Midnight Strangler, a serial killer who had murdered 6 women in the 1990s before disappearing. The Midnight Strangler had never been caught, despite extensive investigation. The killer had targeted professional women, attacking them in their homes late at night. The murders had stopped abruptly in 1997, leading investigators to assume the killer had died, moved away, or been imprisoned for other crimes. Dr. Hart's notes suggested she had developed a new theory about the Midnight Strangler's identity. She'd been analyzing the psychological profile and crime patterns and had identified several potential suspects who had been overlooked in the original investigation. One name appeared repeatedly in her notes, Detective Martin Cross, who had been the lead investigator on the Midnight Strangler case. Dr. Hart had been questioning his methods and conclusions, suggesting that crucial evidence had been overlooked or misinterpreted. Walsh felt a chill as she read the notes. Detective Cross had retired 5 years ago, but he was still alive and living in the city. If Dr. Hart had suspected him of being the Midnight Strangler, it would certainly provide a motive for murder. She arranged to meet with Detective Cross at his home, a modest ranch house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with gray hair and tired eyes. He invited Walsh into his living room, which was filled with police memorabilia and commendations. "I heard about Dr. Hart's death," Cross said. "Terrible thing. She was a smart woman, always asking tough questions." "Did you know she was investigating the Midnight Strangler case?" Cross's expression became guarded. "She'd been in touch, yes, wanted to interview me about the investigation. I told her everything I could remember. She seemed to think there were problems with the original investigation." There are always problems with investigations, especially old ones. We did the best we could with the resources we had. The Midnight Strangler was a careful killer. He didn't leave much evidence. Walsh studied Cross carefully. His answers were reasonable, but something in his manner suggested he was hiding something. She decided to push harder. Dr. Hart's notes suggest she suspected someone close to the investigation might have been the killer. Cross's face went pale. That's ridiculous. Every member of the team was thoroughly vetted. We all passed polygraph tests, background checks, everything. But the killer had inside knowledge of police procedures. He knew how to avoid leaving evidence, how to cover his tracks. That suggests someone with law enforcement training, or someone who studied police methods extensively. The Midnight Strangler was intelligent, possibly educated in criminology or psychology. We considered that possibility. Walsh left the meeting with more questions than answers. Cross had been defensive, but that could be natural for a retired detective having his career questioned. She needed more concrete evidence before she could consider him a serious suspect. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Hart's research assistant, Jennifer Park, contacted Walsh with information about her employer's recent activities. Dr. Hart was excited about something she'd discovered, Jennifer explained. She'd been analyzing old crime scene photos and found a detail that had been missed. She said it would crack the case wide open. "What kind of detail?" "She wouldn't tell me specifically, but it had something to do with the killer's signature. She said she'd figured out why the murders stopped so suddenly in 1997. Walsh returned to Dr. Hart's office and searched through her files more carefully. Hidden in a folder marked Personal was a single photograph, a crime scene photo from the Midnight Strangler case, with a small detail circled in red ink. The detail was almost invisible, a partial fingerprint on a window latch overlooked by the original investigators. Dr. Hart had enhanced the image using modern digital techniques, and the fingerprint was clear enough for comparison. Walsh ran the print through the database and got a hit. The fingerprint belonged to Detective Martin Cross. The evidence was damning, but Walsh knew she needed more to build a case. She obtained a warrant to search Cross's home and found a trophy collection hidden in his basement, jewelry and personal items from the Midnight Strangler's victims. When confronted with the evidence, Cross broke down completely. "I never meant for it to go so far," he confessed. "The first one was an accident. I was investigating a domestic violence call, and when I saw her there, alone and vulnerable, Something snapped. After that, I couldn't stop. Why did you stop in 1997? I got scared. The investigation was getting too close and I was afraid of being caught. I thought if I stopped, everyone would assume the killer was dead or had moved away. But Dr. Hart figured it out. She was too smart, too persistent. When she called and said she wanted to meet to discuss new evidence, I knew she'd found something. I couldn't let her expose me. Cross had killed der Hart the same way he'd killed his other victims. A single shot to the head, late at night, in the privacy of her home. He'd used his police training to avoid leaving evidence, and his knowledge of the investigation to stay one step ahead of his colleagues. But Dr. Hart's expertise in forensic psychology had been his downfall. She'd understood that the perfect crime was impossible because criminals inevitably made mistakes, and she'd found his. Martin Cross was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Dr. Hart and the 6 victims of the Midnight Strangler. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming that those who hunt killers are incapable of becoming killers themselves. Walsh reflected on the case as she wrote her final report. Dr. Hart had been right about one thing. The perfect crime didn't exist. But she'd been wrong about something else. Sometimes the greatest danger came not from strangers in the night, but from those who had sworn to protect and serve. The irony of Dr. Hart's death was not lost on the forensic psychology community. She'd spent her career studying criminal minds, only to become the victim of one she'd helped create. Her work had exposed a killer, but it had also cost her life. In the end, Detective Walsh realized the perfect crime wasn't about avoiding capture. It was about understanding that every criminal action had consequences, and that justice, however delayed, would eventually prevail. Dr. Hart's death had solved not just one murder, but 7, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. The case files were finally closed, but the lessons remained. In the game of cat and mouse between criminals and law enforcement, the hunter could easily become the hunted, and the line between justice and vengeance was thinner than most people realized. Case 6, The Art of Murder. The Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts had been Marcus Rothschild's second home for over 40 years. As the museum's chief curator, he had assembled one of the world's most prestigious collections of Renaissance art, traveling to private estates and auction houses across Europe to acquire masterpieces for public display. So when he was found dead in the museum's storage vault at 3:00 a.m., surrounded by priceless paintings and sculptures, Detective Maria Santos knew she was investigating more than just a murder. She was entering a world where art, money, and passion intersected in deadly ways. The crime scene was surreal. Rothschild's body lay beside a recently acquired Caravaggio painting, his head bashed in with what appeared to be a marble statue of Venus. Blood had splattered across several nearby canvases, potentially destroying millions of dollars worth of art. Security cameras show he entered the vault at 11:30 p.m., reported Detective Tom Bradley, Santos's partner. But the system was mysteriously disabled from 11:45 p.m. until 3:15 a.m., when the overnight security guard found the body. Santos studied the scene carefully. The murder weapon, a 15th century marble statue, was worth more than most people's homes. Using it to kill someone seemed almost sacrilegious, but it had been brutally effective. Any idea what he was doing here so late? Santos asked. According to the security logs, he was conducting an inventory of new acquisitions. The museum recently received a major donation from the Pemberton estate, about 20 paintings and sculptures worth an estimated $50 million. The Pemberton donation was significant. Helena Pemberton had been a wealthy collector who died 6 months earlier, leaving her entire art collection to the museum. But Santos learned that the donation had been controversial within the museum's board of directors. Not everyone supported accepting the Pemberton collection, explained Dr. Catherine Wells, the museum's assistant curator. There were questions about provenance, whether some of the pieces might have been stolen during World War II. This was a sensitive issue in the art world. Many European collections had been looted by the Nazis, and museums were increasingly careful about exhibiting works with questionable histories. If the Pemberton collection contained stolen art, it could create legal and ethical problems for the museum. What was Marcus's position on the donation? He was enthusiastic about it. The collection included some extraordinary pieces, including a lost Van Gogh that hadn't been seen in public for decades. Marcus felt the cultural value outweighed any historical concerns. Santos made notes. Art authentication and provenance research were complex fields, involving historical documents, scientific analysis, and expert opinions. If someone had discovered that pieces in the Pemberton collection were stolen or fake, it could provide a motive for murder. The investigation revealed that several people had been working late at the museum that night. Dr. Jonathan Pierce, a visiting art historian from Oxford, had been researching the Pemberton collection in the library. Sarah Mitchell, a graduate student in art history, had been photographing pieces for her doctoral dissertation, and Victor Kozlov, the museum's security chief, had been conducting his regular rounds. Santos interviewed each of them, looking for inconsistencies in their stories. Dr. Pierce was particularly interesting. He specialized in Nazi-looted art and had been brought in specifically to investigate the Pemberton collection's provenance. I had concerns about several pieces, Dr. Pierce admitted when questioned. The documentation was incomplete, and there were gaps in the ownership history that raised red flags. I was planning to recommend that the museum delay the exhibition until we could conduct more thorough research. How did Marcus feel about that recommendation? He was resistant. He felt I was being overly cautious, that the museum couldn't afford to let such an important collection slip away over what he called historical technicalities. This suggested a conflict between Rothschild's desire to acquire prestigious art and Pierce's concerns about ethical issues. In the competitive world of museum curating, such disagreements could become intense. Santos discovered that the museum's board had been scheduled to vote on the Pemberton exhibition the following week. If Pierce's research had proven that the collection contained stolen art, it would have been a major embarrassment for Rothschild and could have damaged his reputation irreparably. The case took an unexpected turn when Santos learned that one of the Pemberton pieces, a small Degas sculpture, had been reported stolen from a Jewish family in Paris during the Nazi occupation. The family's descendants had been searching for it for decades and had recently hired a lawyer to pursue its return. The sculpture alone is worth about $2 million, explained Rebecca Goldstein, the lawyer representing the family. But it's not about money. It's about recovering a piece of their heritage that was stolen during the Holocaust. Santos realized that if the museum had proceeded with the exhibition, they could have faced expensive legal battles and negative publicity. Someone with a financial interest in the museum, or in the art market generally, might have killed Rothschild to prevent him from exposing the truth about the collection. The investigation revealed that Sarah Mitchell, the graduate student, had been more than just a researcher. She was actually working for an art authentication firm that had been hired to evaluate the Pemberton collection. Her real job was to determine which pieces were genuine and which might be forgeries. I wasn't supposed to tell anyone about my real purpose, Sarah confessed when confronted. The authentication firm was hired by the museum's insurance company. They wanted an independent evaluation before covering the collection. What did you discover? Several pieces were definitely forgeries. The Van Gogh that Marcus was so excited about was a very good fake, probably created in the 1950s. The insurance company would never have covered it if they'd known. This revelation provided another motive for murder. If Rothschild had discovered that Sarah was secretly evaluating the collection, he might have threatened to expose her deception. Or if Sarah had tried to blackmail him with her findings, the confrontation could have turned violent. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Victor Kozlov, the security chief, admitted that he had been selling information about the museum's acquisitions to private collectors and art dealers. It was just information, Kozlov explained. I would tell certain people when the museum was acquiring new pieces, what they were paying, things like that. Collectors like to know what's available on the market. Did you tell anyone about the Pemberton collection? Yes, I mentioned it to Anton Volkov, a Russian collector who specializes in European art. He was very interested in the Van Gogh. Santos realized that Volkov might have been planning to steal the painting or to expose it as a fake to drive down its value so he could acquire it cheaply. If Rothschild had discovered this connection, it could have led to a confrontation. When Santos and Bradley tracked down Anton Volkov, they found him at his mansion in the city's exclusive Hills district. He was a wealthy businessman in his 50s with a reputation for acquiring art through questionable means. I knew Marcus Rothschild professionally, Volkov said when questioned. We sometimes competed for the same pieces at auction, but I would never harm him over a business matter. Did you know that the Van Gogh in the Pemberton collection was a fake? Volkov's expression changed. I suspected it might be. The provenance was questionable, and the brushwork in the photographs didn't look right. But I assumed the museum's experts would discover that during their authentication process. Santos pressed further. Did you meet with Marcus the night he died? No, I was at home with my wife. We had dinner with friends. You can check with them. Volkov's alibi was solid, but Santos noticed something odd about his art collection. Several pieces looked familiar, and she realized they matched descriptions of works that had been stolen from other museums over the years. The case broke when Santos discovered that Dr. Pierce had been falsifying his research reports. He had been hired not to investigate the Pemberton collection's provenance, but to create documentation that would make questionable pieces appear legitimate. I needed the money, Pierce confessed when confronted with evidence of his deception. My university position was being eliminated, and I had debts. When certain collectors offered to pay me to authenticate their pieces, I rationalized it as helping important art find its way to public display. But Marcus discovered what you were doing. He found inconsistencies in my reports. Marcus was brilliant. He knew art history better than anyone. When he confronted me that night, I panicked. Pierce had killed Rothschild to prevent him from exposing the authentication fraud. The murder had been unplanned, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. I never meant for it to happen, Pierce explained. We were arguing about the ethics of the situation, and Marcus threatened to report me to the authorities. I grabbed the statue without thinking and it was over. Dr. Jonathan Pierce was sentenced to life in prison for murder in the first degree. The Pemberton collection was eventually returned to the families from whom it had been stolen or donated to museums that specialized in recovering looted art. Marcus Rothschild was remembered as a curator who had died defending the integrity of the art world. The museum established an ethics committee in his name, dedicated to ensuring that all acquisitions were properly researched and legitimately obtained. Santos reflected on the case as she filed her final report. The art world, she realized, was not the refined cultural sphere it appeared to be. Behind the beauty and sophistication lurked the same human emotions that drove all crimes: greed, jealousy, fear, and the desperate need to protect one's reputation. The murder had exposed a network of corruption that extended far beyond the museum walls. Authentication fraud, stolen art, and unethical collecting practices were more common than the public realized. Rothschild's death had been the price of trying to maintain standards in a world where money often mattered more than morality. Case 7. The Digital Detective. Silicon Valley had always been a place where fortunes were made and lost overnight, where brilliant minds created technologies that changed the world, and where competition was cutthroat. But Detective Alex Chen had never encountered a case quite like the murder of Jeremy Walsh, a 34-year-old software engineer who had been found dead in his high-tech apartment, apparently the victim of a crime that existed at the intersection of the digital and physical worlds. The crime scene was a study in modern contradictions. Walsh's apartment was filled with the latest technology: smart home systems, multiple computers, advanced security cameras. Yet he had been killed with a simple kitchen knife, stabbed multiple times in his living room. The murder weapon lay beside his body, wiped clean of fingerprints. The interesting thing is the digital evidence, reported Detective Maya Patel, Chen's partner and the department's expert on cybercrime. His computers were all wiped remotely about an hour after the estimated time of death. Someone destroyed all the data using administrative access. Chen studied the scene. Walsh had been a cryptocurrency developer, working on blockchain technology for a startup called Cryptodyne. His work involved creating secure digital currencies, and he had access to systems containing millions of dollars worth of digital assets. Any signs of forced entry? None. The smart lock system shows that Walsh let someone in voluntarily at 9:15 p.m. But here's the strange part. The visitor left at 9:23 p.m., only 8 minutes later. The timing was crucial. 8 minutes was barely enough time for a conversation, let alone a murder. Either the killer was extremely efficient or something else was going on. Chen's investigation began with Walsh's colleagues at Cryptodyne. The company was developing a new cryptocurrency called Secure Coin, which promised to be unhackable and completely anonymous. The project was worth potentially billions of dollars if successful. Jeremy was brilliant, explained Dr. Lisa Kim, Cryptodyne's chief technology officer. He'd figured out how to solve the blockchain trilemma, achieving security, scalability, and decentralization simultaneously. His algorithm was revolutionary. Who else had access to his work? The development team was small, just 5 people. Jeremy, myself, Marcus Reed, our security expert, Sarah Chen, the database architect, and David Park, who handled the user interface. Chen made notes. Small teams meant close working relationships, but also potential conflicts over credit and financial rewards. If Walsh had been about to patent his algorithm or leave the company, it could have created deadly tensions. The investigation revealed that Cryptodyne had been negotiating with several major investors, including a consortium of banks and a mysterious venture capital firm called Phantom Holdings. Walsh's algorithm was the key to securing a $100 million investment round. Jeremy had been acting strangely lately, Dr. Kim admitted when pressed. He was paranoid about security, constantly checking his systems, worried about industrial espionage. He said he'd discovered something that could change everything. What kind of something? He wouldn't say, but he'd been working on a side project, something he called Operation Transparency. He was very secretive about it. Chen realized that Walsh might have been investigating something beyond just cryptocurrency development. If he discovered illegal activities or security breaches, it could have provided a motive for murder. The digital forensics team made a breakthrough when they recovered fragments of data from Walsh's computers. Despite the remote wiping, some files had been cached in hidden system folders. The fragments revealed that Walsh had been tracking unusual patterns in cryptocurrency transactions. He was following the money, Patel explained as she analyzed the data. Walsh had identified a network of cryptocurrency wallets that were being used to launder money from illegal activities. He'd traced transactions worth over $50 million. Money laundering through cryptocurrency? It's becoming increasingly common. Criminals use digital currencies to hide their tracks, converting illegal profits into seemingly legitimate digital assets. Walsh had figured out how to identify these patterns. The investigation revealed that Walsh had been planning to expose the money laundering network to federal authorities. He'd been gathering evidence for months, creating a detailed map of how criminals were using cryptocurrency to hide their activities. Chen interviewed Marcus Reed, Cryptodyne's security expert, who had been working closely with Walsh on the Secure Coin project. Reed was a former NSA analyst who specialized in cybersecurity and had a reputation for being ruthless in protecting company secrets. Jeremy was brilliant but naive, Reed explained. He thought technology should be used to make the world better, but he didn't understand the realities of the crypto market. There are powerful people who profit from the current system. Did he tell you about his money laundering investigation? He mentioned it, yes. I warned him that it was dangerous to get involved in that kind of thing. The people who run these networks don't hesitate to eliminate threats. Reed's warning proved prophetic. Chen discovered that Walsh had been receiving death threats for weeks, messages sent through encrypted channels that couldn't be traced. Someone had been watching his investigation and was prepared to kill to protect their operation. The case took a dramatic turn when Chen learned that Phantom Holdings, the venture capital firm investing in Cryptodyne, was actually a front for the money laundering network Walsh had been investigating. The firm was using legitimate cryptocurrency investments to hide illegal profits from drug trafficking and other criminal activities. Walsh had figured out that our own investors were criminals, Dr. Kim said when presented with the evidence. He was going to expose them, which would have destroyed the company. We would have lost everything. This revelation cast the entire Cryptodyne team in a new light. If Walsh had threatened to expose Phantom Holdings, any of his colleagues might have had motive to kill him to protect their financial interests. Chen focused on Sarah Chen, the database architect who shared her surname but was no relation. Sarah had been the last person to see Walsh alive, according to security records, and had left the building shortly after the murder. I went to his apartment to discuss the database optimization, Sarah explained when questioned. Jeremy had been working on improving the blockchain efficiency, and we needed to coordinate our efforts. What had happened during your visit? We talked about the technical challenges, reviewed some code. It was a normal work meeting. When I left, Jeremy was alive and working on his computer. But Chen discovered inconsistencies in Sarah's story. Security footage showed her leaving Walsh's apartment building at 9:23 p.m., but she had claimed the meeting lasted much longer. And phone records revealed that she had made several calls to unlisted numbers immediately after leaving. The breakthrough came when Chen traced those phone calls. They led to a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in cyber-enabled money laundering. Sarah Chen had been feeding them information about Walsh's investigation, warning them that he was getting close to exposing their operation. "I was in debt," Sarah confessed when confronted with evidence. "Gambling debts, credit cards, student loans. When they offered me money for information about Jeremy's research, I thought it was harmless. I never imagined they would kill him." "But you continued to help them even after he was murdered?" "I was scared. They said if I didn't cooperate, I would be next. I was supposed to delete all his files remotely, make it look like a random crime." Sarah had been an unwitting accomplice in her colleague's murder. She had provided the criminals with Walsh's schedule and security codes, making it possible for them to gain access to his apartment. But she claimed she hadn't known they were planning to kill him. The actual killer was revealed to be Viktor Petrov, a professional assassin who specialized in making murders look like random crimes. He had been hired by the money laundering network to eliminate Walsh before he could expose their operation. Petrov had entered Walsh's apartment using information provided by Sarah Chen, killed him quickly and efficiently, then left while she remotely wiped his computers to destroy evidence of the money laundering investigation. "It was supposed to look like a robbery gone wrong," Petrov explained during his confession. "But the victim was smarter than we expected. He had backup systems, hidden files, redundant storage. Even after we destroyed his main computers, there were traces of his investigation." Viktor Petrov was sentenced to life in prison for murder, while Sarah Chen received a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation in exposing the money laundering network. Several high-level criminals were arrested and millions of dollars in illegal cryptocurrency assets were seized. Jeremy Walsh's murder had exposed a dark side of the digital revolution. Cryptocurrency, designed to promote freedom and transparency, had become a tool for criminals to hide their activities. His death had been the price of trying to use technology for good in a world where it was increasingly used for evil. Cryptodyne eventually collapsed after the scandal, its investors fleeing and its reputation destroyed. But Walsh's algorithm was eventually released as open-source software, allowing other developers to build upon his work. Chen reflected on the case as she wrote her final report. The digital world, she realized, was not separate from the physical world. It was another arena where the same human conflicts played out. Greed, fear, and the desire for power motivated crimes whether they were committed with knives or keyboards. The murder of Jeremy Walsh became a cautionary tale in Silicon Valley, a reminder that in the race to digitize everything, the fundamental human capacity for evil remained unchanged. Technology could be used to commit perfect crimes, but it could also be used to solve them, leaving digital fingerprints that were harder to erase than physical ones. Case 8, the final performance. The Grand Opera House had been the crown jewel of the city's cultural district for over a century, its velvet seats and gilded balconies hosting legendary performances by the world's greatest artists. But on the night of October 15th, the theater became the scene of a different kind of drama when renowned soprano Elena Vasquez was found dead in her dressing room, apparently poisoned just minutes before her final performance in La Traviata. Detective Robert Kane had investigated murders in many venues, but never in an opera house. The crime scene was like stepping into another world. Costumes hung on elaborate racks, makeup tables covered with theatrical paints, and the air thick with the scent of stage powder and decades of performance history. Elena Vasquez lay slumped in her chair, still wearing her period costume for the role of Violetta. Her face was contorted in an expression of agony, and a glass of wine sat on her dressing table, half empty. The medical examiner would later confirm that she had died from cyanide poisoning, administered through the wine. "She was supposed to go on stage in 15 minutes, explained Margaret Foster, the opera company's general manager. Elena was a perfectionist. She never would have missed a performance voluntarily. When she didn't respond, to the 5-minute call, we found her like this. Detective Sarah Park, Kane's partner, was already interviewing the cast and crew. We've got about 60 people who were in the building tonight. Singers, musicians, stagehands, administrative staff. The victim was well known, but apparently not well liked. Kane began studying the victim's background. Elena Vasquez was a world-renowned soprano who had performed at the Metropolitan Opera, La Scala, and other prestigious venues. At 42, she was at the height of her career, but she had a reputation for being difficult, demanding, and ruthless in her pursuit of perfection. Elena was talented but temperamental, admitted conductor James Richardson when Kane interviewed him. She had very high standards and wasn't shy about expressing displeasure when others didn't meet them. She'd made enemies throughout her career. Any recent conflicts? She'd been having disputes with several people. Our lead tenor, David Martinez, was angry because she'd complained about his performance to the critics. Maria Santos, our chorus director, was furious because Elena had several chorus members fired for what she considered inadequate performances. Kane made notes. Opera companies were notoriously political, with intense rivalries and ego conflicts. Elena's perfectionism had apparently created numerous enemies, any of whom might have had motive for murder. The investigation revealed that Elena had been drinking wine in her dressing room as part of her pre-performance ritual. She always had a glass of Chianti exactly 30 minutes before curtain time, claiming it relaxed her voice. The wine had been delivered by Tommy Chen, a young stagehand who served as the company's general assistant. I brought her the wine like always, Tommy explained nervously. Same routine every night. I'd open a fresh bottle, pour it into her special glass, and leave it on her dressing table. She was very particular about the timing. Who had access to the wine? It was kept in the prop room with other refreshments. Lots of people go in and out of there during performances. Anyone could have tampered with it. Kane realized that the killer had taken advantage of Elena's predictable routine. Knowing exactly when she would drink the wine, they had been able to time the poisoning perfectly. But cyanide was a dangerous substance to handle. The killer would have needed knowledge of chemistry and access to the poison. The investigation revealed that Dr. Patricia Wells, the company's artistic director, had a background in chemistry before switching to music. She had been openly critical of Elena's behavior and had been pressuring the board to terminate her contract. Elena was destroying the company's reputation, Dr. Wells explained when questioned. She was impossible to work with, and her demands were bankrupting us. She insisted on custom costumes, expensive hotels, first-class travel. The board was starting to question whether she was worth the cost. Were you planning to fire her? We were considering not renewing her contract. Elena had another year on her current deal, but after that, we were going to pursue other options. This provided a clear motive for Elena to eliminate Dr. Wells, but Kane was looking for someone who wanted to eliminate Elena. He continued investigating other members of the company. The breakthrough came when Kane discovered that Elena had been having an affair with the company's benefactor, wealthy businessman Richard Blackwood. His wife, Catherine Blackwood, was a major donor to the opera company and had recently learned about the affair. I knew about Richard's infidelity, Catherine admitted when confronted. Elena wasn't the first, and she wouldn't have been the last. But she was different. She was trying to convince him to leave me. How did that make you feel? Angry, betrayed. But I would never kill someone over a marriage that was already over in all but name. Kane wasn't convinced. Catherine Blackwood had both motive and opportunity. She was a regular presence at the opera house and would have had access to Elena's dressing room. But the investigation revealed that she had been at a charity dinner across town during the time of the murder, with dozens of witnesses. The case took an unexpected turn when Kane learned that Elena had been planning to expose corruption within the opera company. She had discovered that several board members were embezzling money from the company's endowment fund, using fraudulent contracts and inflated expenses to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars. Elena was gathering evidence, explained her personal assistant, Jennifer Park. She had been secretly recording conversations and copying financial documents. She was planning to expose everything after this performance. Did she tell anyone about her investigation? She mentioned it to her lawyer, said she was going to clean house at the company. Elena might have been difficult, but she genuinely loved opera and was disgusted by people who were stealing from the arts. This revelation provided numerous new suspects. Any of the corrupt board members might have killed Elena to prevent her from exposing their crimes. Kane obtained financial records and discovered that 3 board members had been systematically stealing from the company. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, the chorus director who had been fired by Elena, contacted Kane with crucial information. "I saw something strange that night," Maria explained. "I was in the prop room about an hour before the performance when I saw Dr. Wells handling a small vial of liquid. She was very secretive about it, hid it when she saw me." Kane realized that Dr. Wells had been his primary suspect all along, but he had been distracted by the other potential motives. When confronted with Maria's testimony, Dr. Wells's alibi began to crumble. Patricia had access to the wine, knowledge of chemistry, and a strong motive to eliminate Elena, Park observed, and she would have known about Elena's pre-performance routine. When Kane and Park arrested Dr. Wells at her office, they found chemistry equipment and an empty vial that had contained cyanide. She had been planning the murder for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity. "Elena was going to destroy everything I'd built," Dr. Wells confessed during interrogation. "This company was my life's work, and she was turning it into her personal vehicle for fame and fortune. The board was considering making her artistic director. Can you imagine? She would have ruined us completely." "So you decided to kill her?" "I wanted to save the company. Elena's death would solve multiple problems. It would end her disruptive influence, generate sympathy donations, and allow us to rebuild with a more collaborative approach." Dr. Wells had calculated that Elena's death would actually benefit the opera company financially. The publicity from a tragic murder would attract donations and attention, while eliminating the expensive and difficult star would reduce operating costs. Dr. Patricia Wells was sentenced to life in prison for murder in the first degree. The opera company struggled to recover from the scandal, eventually closing after losing most of its major donors and public support. Elena Vasquez's final performance was never completed, but her death led to reforms in arts administration and better oversight of nonprofit organizations. Her murder had exposed the dark side of cultural institutions, where artistic passion could be corrupted by greed and jealousy. Kane reflected on the case as he walked through the abandoned opera house months later. The building was being sold to developers, its grand architecture about to be destroyed for a shopping center. The murder had killed more than just Elena Vasquez. It had killed the institution she had died trying to protect. The case reminded Kane that even in the most refined cultural settings, the basic human emotions that drove murder remained the same. Jealousy, greed, and the desire for power were universal motivations, whether the crime occurred in a back alley or a grand opera house. Elena Vasquez was remembered not just as a great artist, but as someone who had died trying to preserve the integrity of the arts. Her murder became a cautionary tale about the importance of ethical leadership in cultural institutions and the tragic consequences when passion for art was overshadowed by personal ambition. Case 9. The Collector's Obsession. Detective Michael Torres had seen plenty of crime scenes in his 20-year career, but nothing quite like the mansion of Alexander Grimm, the city's most notorious collector of rare artifacts. Grimm was found dead in his private museum, a vast room filled with priceless antiquities from around the world, his body lying beneath a display case that housed a collection of ancient poison rings. The irony wasn't lost on Torres. Grimm had been poisoned himself, killed by a toxin that had been administered through a rare 16th century wine goblet that was part of his collection. The goblet, crafted by Renaissance artisans and worth more than most people's houses, had become both murder weapon and evidence. Time of death was approximately 11:30 p.m., reported the medical examiner. The poison was aconitine, extracted from monk's hood plants. It's a particularly nasty way to die. Causes paralysis followed by cardiac arrest. Torres studied the scene. Grimm's private museum was a wonder of organized obsession. Every artifact was carefully cataloged, displayed in climate-controlled cases, and protected by state-of-the-art security systems. The collection included Egyptian sarcophagi, medieval armor, ancient weapons, and curiosities from every corner of the globe. The security system shows no signs of tampering, reported Detective Anna Martinez, Torres's partner. Grimm let his killer in voluntarily, or they had authorized access. The wine goblet had been taken from its display case and used to serve what appears to be a very expensive vintage. The investigation revealed that Grimm had been hosting a private viewing that evening for a select group of collectors and dealers. 6 people had been in the mansion during the time of the murder, all of them experts in antiquities and art. Alexander was passionate about his collection, explained Dr. Helena Voss, a professor of archaeology and one of the evening's guests. He lived for the thrill of acquiring rare pieces, especially ones with dark histories. He was particularly fond of objects that had been used to commit murder. That's rather macabre, Torres observed. Alexander believed that objects absorb the energy of their past uses. He was fascinated by the idea that his collection contained the instruments of dozens of historical murders. Torres made notes. Grimm's obsession with murder weapons seemed prophetic. Given his own death, the investigation would need to focus on the other collectors who had been present that evening. The guest list included several notable figures in the antiquities world. There was Marcus Klein, a dealer who specialized in medieval artifacts; Sarah Chen, a private collector known for her ruthless acquisition methods; Dr. James Morrison, a museum curator who had been competing with Grimm for certain pieces; and twins Robert and Margaret Thorne, who ran a high-end auction house. "Tell me about the evening's events," Torres asked Dr. Voss. Alexander was showing off his latest acquisition, a set of poison rings that had supposedly belonged to the Borgia family. He was very excited about them, claimed they were authentic 15th century pieces. He served wine in various historical goblets, making it a themed experience. Did anyone seem upset or angry? There was tension. Marcus Klein was furious because Alexander had outbid him for the poison rings at a private auction. Sarah Chen was questioning their authenticity, which always made Alexander defensive. And Dr. Morrison seemed distracted, preoccupied with something. The investigation revealed that Grimm's collecting methods were often controversial. He had a reputation for using questionable tactics to acquire pieces, including bribing museum officials, funding illegal excavations, and purchasing artifacts that had been stolen from archaeological sites. Alexander didn't care about the ethics of acquisition, explained Marcus Klein when Torres interviewed him. He only cared about possessing unique pieces. He'd stolen opportunities from other collectors, outbid museums that needed pieces for educational purposes, and corrupted the entire market with his reckless spending. That sounds like a strong motive for murder. I was angry with him, yes, but I wouldn't kill someone over a business dispute. There are other ways to handle conflicts in the antiquities world. Torres wasn't convinced. Klein had been openly hostile toward Grimm, and poison rings were his area of expertise. He would have known how to extract aconitine and administer it effectively. The investigation took an interesting turn when Torres discovered that one of the guests, Dr. Morrison, had been secretly working with federal authorities to build a case against Grimm for trafficking in stolen antiquities. The FBI had been investigating Grimm's collection for months, trying to identify pieces that had been illegally imported or stolen from their countries of origin. Alexander was about to be arrested, Dr. Morrison admitted when confronted. The FBI had identified at least a dozen pieces in his collection that were definitely stolen. They were planning to raid his mansion within the week. Did Grimm know about the investigation? I think he suspected something. He'd been more paranoid lately, talking about selling parts of his collection and moving abroad. He might have realized that his empire was about to collapse. This revelation provided a new motive for murder. If Grimm had discovered that Dr. Morrison was working with federal authorities, he might have threatened to expose him, or Morrison might have killed him to prevent him from destroying evidence or fleeing the country. But the case took an unexpected turn when Torres learned that Sarah Chen had been conducting her own investigation into the authenticity of Grimm's collection. She had discovered that several of his most prized pieces were actually sophisticated forgeries. Alexander had been deceived by forgers multiple times, Sarah explained. His ego prevented him from admitting when he'd been fooled. The poison rings he was so proud of were actually created in the 1920s by a known forger named Giovanni Toretti. How did you know this? I'd seen Toretti's work before. He was brilliant at creating fake Renaissance pieces, and he had a particular talent for poison rings. I tried to warn Alexander, but he refused to listen. Torres studied Sarah Chen's face carefully. Her revelation about the forgeries added another layer to an already complex case. You're saying Grimm's prize collection contained fakes? Not all of it, but several key pieces. The poison rings, a medieval dagger he'd acquired last year, and at least 3 of his Renaissance goblets, including the one used to poison him. Sarah's voice carried a note of professional satisfaction. Alexander's obsession with dark histories made him vulnerable to forgers who understood his psychological weaknesses. This information cast new light on the murder weapon. If the goblet itself was a fake, the killer might have chosen it deliberately, adding insult to injury by using a forgery to kill a man who prided himself on authenticity. The breakthrough came when Torres examined the security footage more carefully. While the camera showed all 6 guests throughout the evening, he noticed something odd about the timeline. During a 15-minute window between 11 o'clock and 11:15 p.m., the twins Robert and Margaret Thorne had been absent from the main museum room. "We went to use the restroom," Robert Thorne explained when confronted. "Alexander's mansion is enormous. We got lost trying to find our way back." But Margaret's story was different. "We were in the kitchen, actually. Robert was feeling ill and needed some water. We were there for maybe 10 minutes. The contradiction was telling. When Torres pressed them separately, the truth emerged. Margaret had discovered that several pieces they'd sold to Grimm through their auction house were among the items the FBI had flagged as stolen. If the federal investigation proceeded, their reputation would be destroyed, and they could face criminal charges. "We had to stop him," Margaret finally admitted. "Alexander was going to expose us to save himself. He'd already started making calls, claiming he'd been deceived by our auction house. He was planning to blame us for the stolen pieces." "So you poisoned him?" "Robert created the distraction while I prepared the goblet. I have a background in chemistry. I knew how to extract aconitine from the monk's hood plants in Alexander's garden. The irony of using one of his fake goblets seemed appropriate." Torres realized that the killer had understood Grimm's psychology perfectly. Margaret knew he would insist on using the Renaissance goblet for the wine service, especially when showing off his poison rings. She had counted on his obsession with historical authenticity to deliver the poison. The fake goblet was the perfect murder weapon, Torres observed. Grimm died clutching something he believed was a priceless artifact, never knowing it was as false as the empire he'd built. Margaret Thorne was arrested for murder, while Robert was charged as an accessory. The federal investigation proceeded, ultimately exposing a network of stolen antiquities that spanned 3 continents. Dr. Morrison's cooperation with authorities was revealed publicly, ending his career in the antiquities world, but sparing him criminal charges. Most of Grimm's collection was seized by federal authorities, with genuine pieces returned to their countries of origin and the forgeries sent to museums as examples of historical deception. The mansion was sold, its climate-controlled display cases empty. The obsession that had filled them finally laid to rest. As Torres filed his final report, he reflected on the case's central irony. Alexander Grimm had spent his life collecting instruments of murder, believing they held some dark power. In the end, it wasn't the ancient poisons or medieval daggers that killed him. It was his own corruption and the enemies his obsession had created. The real murder weapon, Torres wrote in his notes, wasn't the goblet or the poison. It was greed itself, the insatiable hunger to possess what shouldn't be possessed, to own what belongs to history, to turn human heritage into private treasure. The case closed with a final twist that would have amused Grimm. The poison rings he'd been so proud of, the fakes that had started his final conflict, were donated to a museum's collection of art forgeries. They would be displayed not as instruments of historical murder, but as examples of how the past could be manipulated to deceive the present. In death, Alexander Grimm had become part of the dark history he'd always sought to collect. Thank you for listening. As the last pages close on tonight's mystery, let your breath slow and your thoughts drift softly away from the edges of the story. You've followed a quiet path through forgotten archives and autumn leaves. Now there's nothing more to uncover, only stillness and the steady rhythm of rest. Wherever you are, you're safe. The night holds you gently. The past can rest now, and so can you. Good night.